She didn't call ahead. She didn't warn anyone. 17 years of silence, and then, her face in the lobby of Harlow Industries, holding 2 suitcases and nothing else. Beside her stood a boy. 16, maybe 17. He moved through the crowded atrium without hurrying, without looking around. Like he already owned the floor beneath him. Ethan Harlow watched from the mezzanine and felt something ancient shift in his chest. Why did that boy walk like someone he used to be? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Ethan was in the middle of a sentence when his assistant touched his arm. That alone was unusual. Dana had worked for him for 9 years. She knew better than to interrupt a press conference. She leaned close and placed a photograph face down on the podium in front of him. Just placed it there. Said nothing. Ethan kept talking for 3 more seconds. Then he stopped. He turned the photograph over. The reporters in the room noticed the pause. A few of them leaned forward. Ethan Harlow did not pause. Not in public. Not for anything. He set the photograph down, apologized for the interruption, and ended the conference 6 minutes early. He walked off the stage without explaining why. His PR director called after him. He didn't turn around. Security had already moved Nora to a private waiting room on the 4th floor by the time Ethan reached the mezzanine. He stood at the glass and looked in before she could see him. She was sitting with her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Same posture. 17 years and she still sat like she was waiting for something she wasn't sure she deserved. But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the boy beside her. The boy was reading. A paperback, held open with one hand, the spine cracked from heavy use. He wasn't checking his phone. Wasn't looking around the room. He was completely still in the way that only people who are truly comfortable with silence can be. Like the room didn't matter to him. Like being in the headquarters of one of the most powerful companies in the city was just another place to finish a chapter. Ethan watched him for longer than he meant to. Then he pushed open the door. Nora stood when he entered. The boy did not. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. Most people stood when he walked into a room. It was a reflex, something about his presence, his reputation, the way the air in a room shifted when he entered it. Adults did it without thinking. But the boy simply turned a page. Ethan. Nora's voice was steady. Controlled. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't agree to see you, he said. You came anyway. She accepted that without flinching. I'm not here to cause problems. People who aren't here to cause problems don't show up unannounced after 17 years. She didn't argue. She just said, I need one conversation. Private. Soon. Then she glanced at the boy beside her, and something in her expression changed, just slightly. Just enough. Ethan looked at the boy too. Who is he? His name is Cole, she said. He's 16. She said nothing else. Not another word about him. And that silence, that careful, deliberate silence, landed harder than any explanation would have. Ethan pulled out a chair across from them and sat down. He told himself he was going to be professional. Measured. He told himself this was just a meeting, like any other meeting, and he would handle it the way he handled everything, by staying calm and collecting information before reacting. Then Cole looked up from his book. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. The boy's eyes moved from the page, traveled briefly across Ethan's face, and then returned to the book. No recognition. No curiosity. No reaction at all. Like Ethan was furniture. Ethan had been in boardrooms with men who tried to rattle him. He'd sat across from investors who'd wanted to destroy him, partners who'd tried to take what he built, journalists who'd spent months trying to find something on him. None of them had ever unsettled him the way that 2-second glance did. He didn't know why. He told himself it was nothing. Nora reached into her bag. She placed a sealed envelope on the table between them. White, unmarked. Sealed with tape across the flap, like she'd opened and resealed it more than once before deciding to hand it over. I need you to open this when you're alone, she said. Not now. Not in front of anyone. What's in it? Something you should have been shown a long time ago. He looked at the envelope. Then at her. Is this a legal matter? It's a personal one. He picked up the envelope. It was light. Whatever was inside was thin, 1 page, maybe 2. Nora. If there's something I need to know, tell me now. Don't leave it in an. But she was already standing. Cole had already closed his book. And just like that, before Ethan could finish his sentence, they were moving toward the door. Cole walked slightly behind his mother and slightly to her left, like he'd calculated exactly where to be. Like he'd been her shadow for years and knew the shape of her silhouette by heart. Nora paused once at the door. She didn't turn around. Open it alone, she said again. Please. Then they were gone. Ethan sat in that room for a long moment after the door closed. He looked at the envelope in his hands. Dana appeared in the doorway. "Sir? You're 2 o'clock. Cancel it." "And the?" "All of them," he said. "Cancel everything." He took the elevator up to his private office on the top floor. Locked the door. Stood at his desk for a moment, the envelope in both hands, turning it over once. Then he opened it. Inside was a single document. One page, printed cleanly. His name appeared at the top, Ethan James Harlow, in bold type. Below it, a date. 17 years ago, almost to the month. He didn't recognize the document. He had no memory of it. No memory of signing anything that looked like this, in this format, for this kind of purpose. He scanned the page. Near the bottom, one line had been highlighted in yellow. He read it. Then he read it again. He set the page down on his desk. He stepped back from it like it had burned him. He stood in the middle of his office, 17 floors above the city, glass on 3 sides, the skyline spread out in every direction, and he felt, for the first time in a very long time, like the ground beneath him had disappeared. He didn't know what that line meant. But he understood, with complete certainty, that he was supposed to. If this story is already pulling at something in you, you're not alone. Drop a comment and let us know what you think is in that document. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when Chapter 2 drops. This one is only getting started. Marcus found him standing at his desk, the envelope in his hand, staring at it like it had said something to him. "You ended the press conference early," Marcus said, closing the office door behind him. 6 reporters called already. "What happened?" Ethan set the envelope face down on the desk. "Do you remember why Nora left?" The room went quiet in a different way after that question. Marcus had been Ethan's COO for 11 years. Before that, his closest friend. He had never once been caught off guard. But he was caught off guard now, just for a second. Just long enough for Ethan to notice. "Ethan. Answer the question." Marcus looked at him carefully. "You know why." And the thing was, Ethan did know. He had always known. He just hadn't said it out loud in 17 years, and hearing it referred to, even indirectly, made it feel suddenly close again. Like a door he'd bricked over that someone had just knocked on from the other side. He picked up his jacket from the chair. "Go handle the press. Tell them I had a personal matter." Marcus didn't move. Was that her? In the lobby this morning? Ethan walked past him without answering. He didn't go home. He drove without deciding where he was going, and ended up parked outside the city for almost an hour, engine off, watching the light change over the water. 17 years was a long time. Long enough that he'd stopped expecting the memories to hurt when they came. But tonight they came anyway, and they came the way they always did when he let his guard down. Not in order. In pieces. Nora at 26, sitting across from him at a kitchen table that was too small for the apartment they couldn't really afford, laughing at something neither of them could remember an hour later. Nora at 28, standing in the doorway of his office at 2 in the morning, holding 2 cups of coffee, not saying anything. Just standing there because she knew he needed company more than he needed conversation. Then the last memory, which was the one that always arrived last because it hurt the most to hold, coming home to an apartment that was half empty. Her things gone. No note on the table. No voicemail. No explanation. Just the particular silence of a space that had recently held someone who was no longer there. She had found documents. That much, he'd piece together later. Financial records that weren't supposed to leave the building, that someone had moved, he never found out who, and that implicated him in something he hadn't done. She hadn't asked him about it. Hadn't confronted him. Hadn't given him the chance to explain. She had simply decided. And left. What Ethan had never told anyone, not Marcus, not his mother, not a single person, was that he had looked for her. Quietly, carefully, for almost 2 full years. He'd hired someone discreetly. He'd made calls he never logged. He'd gotten close, twice, to an address. Then he'd stopped. He told himself it was because the company needed him. The business was bleeding and he was the only one who could stop it, and he couldn't afford the distraction. That was the story he'd told himself for 17 years, and it was even partly true. But the other part, the part he never examined too closely, was this: finding her felt dangerous. Not because of what she might say. Because of what he might do if he found her and she still didn't want to come back. Some losses are survivable only if you don't look at them directly. He started the engine. He drove home. He didn't open the envelope again that night. Across the city, in a furnished apartment on the east side that smelled like someone else's cleaning products, Nora was helping Cole carry boxes up a narrow staircase. Cole didn't complain. He never complained about moving. That was the thing that quietly broke her heart every time. He was too good at it. He knew how to fold his clothes in a specific order so they'd unpack faster. He knew which box to open first. He developed a whole system, without being asked, without being taught. Because they'd done this before. Too many times. Why this city, he asked, setting a box down in the small bedroom that would be his. Old business, she said. He nodded once. Didn't push. Just started unpacking. She went back to the kitchen and found the box she was dreading, the one she'd packed last and labeled simply miscellaneous because she hadn't wanted to think about what was inside it. She opened it and moved things aside until she found the photograph at the bottom, wrapped in a dish towel. She unwrapped it. She looked at it for a long time. Long enough that Cole could have come in and out twice without her noticing. Then she put it in the kitchen drawer, face down, under some papers. Closed the drawer. Put her hand flat on top of it for a moment, like she was holding something shut. Then she went and made dinner, and neither of them talked about the city, or the reason, or the photograph. Later that night, Cole appeared in the kitchen doorway in a t-shirt and socks, the way he always did when he had a question he'd been sitting on for a while. Is my father still alive? Nora set down the glass she was holding. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them without meaning to. Why are you asking that now? Cole looked at her. Just looked. He had his father's way of being still, though she would never say that, not out loud, not yet. He didn't repeat the question. He didn't explain himself. He just waited, the way he'd always waited, patient in a way that made her feel like she was the one who was 16 and didn't know how to handle hard things. She didn't answer him. And after a moment, he nodded, just once, the same way he'd nodded about the city, and went back to his room. She heard his door close softly. Not slammed. Cole never slammed doors. That was almost worse. In his room, Cole sat on the edge of his mattress in the dark for a minute. Then he picked up his phone. He opened the browser. He typed, Ethan Harlow, CEO. The results loaded immediately. Articles. Business profiles. A magazine cover. His picture on the homepage of Harlow Industries. Cole scrolled slowly, reading without rushing. He stopped on one photograph, a professional headshot, recent, the kind that companies use for press materials. He stared at it for a long time. Then he put his phone face down on the mattress. The same way his mother had put the photograph face down in the drawer. Neither of them knew the other had done it. But in 2 different rooms, in the same apartment, on the first night in a new city, they had both made the exact same choice, to stop looking at something that was already starting to feel too familiar to be a coincidence. Something about this chapter is hitting differently. If you felt it too, leave a comment below and tell us what you think Cole already knows. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when chapter 3 drops. Ethan's personal attorney was not a man who scared easily. Graham Whitfield had handled mergers that could have destroyed careers, litigation that had lasted years, and more than one situation that had never been put in writing anywhere. In 30 years of practicing law, he had developed a face that gave away nothing. So when Ethan slid the document across the desk and Graham read it, and went pale, Ethan felt something cold move through him. Where did you get this? Graham asked. Someone I used to trust. Graham set it down carefully, like it was something that could break. He didn't look up immediately. When he did, his voice was measured in the specific way that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. Not here, he said. And not today. I need to make some calls first. Graham. I mean it, Ethan. Do not show this to anyone else. Do not make copies. Don't even take a photograph of it. He slid it back across the desk. I'll call you by Thursday. Ethan picked it up. Tell me one thing. Is it real? Graham was quiet for 2 seconds too long. That's what I need to find out. That was an answer. Just not the one Ethan had wanted. The charity gala that Thursday was one Ethan had committed to 4 months ago. A children's hospital fundraiser. His name was on the program. He couldn't disappear. He arrived late and was planning to leave early. He was standing near the back of the room, glass in hand, not drinking, when he saw her. Nora was wearing something simple and dark. She wasn't with anyone. She wasn't working the room. She was just standing near a window, watching the crowd the way someone watches a movie they've already seen, present, but separate. She spotted him at the same moment he spotted her. Neither of them moved toward the other immediately. Then she did, slowly, and he stayed where he was and let her come. I didn't know you'd be here, she said. Sure you didn't. She accepted that without flinching. Believe what you want. I came because they were honoring someone I know. What is that document, Nora? She glanced around, not nervously, just checking the space. Not here. You gave it to me. You don't get to keep saying, not here. She looked at him directly. It's not a threat. It's a correction. A correction of what? Of what you think happened, she said quietly. 17 years ago. What you've believed all this time, about how things fell apart, you don't have the full picture. He stared at her. Then give it to me. I'm trying to. She held his gaze. But some things need to be given carefully. Or they cause more damage than the original wound. She set her glass down on a nearby table. Give me a few more days. She walked away before he could respond. And he stood there in the middle of a room full of people laughing and donating money and having a perfectly normal evening, feeling like the floor had shifted slightly beneath him. Again. The security report landed on his desk Friday morning. Standard overnight summary. He almost didn't read it. Then he saw the photograph clipped to the second page. A grainy image from one of the exterior cameras. A boy standing on the pavement across from Harlow Industries, maybe 30 meters back. He had a camera, not a phone, an actual camera, held up and aimed at the building's facade. Not the entrance. The facade. The architecture. The timestamp read 4:47 p.m. the previous afternoon. Ethan looked at the photograph for a long time. He couldn't make out the face clearly, the resolution was poor, the angle slightly off. But the posture. The way the boy stood with his weight slightly forward, head tilted up toward the upper floors. There was something about it. He flipped to the guard's note at the bottom. Subject noticed, moved on before approach. No incident. No incident. Just a teenager with a camera, photographing a building, then disappearing before anyone could ask why. He almost didn't notice the notebook until Friday afternoon, when his assistant mentioned that the waiting room on the 4th floor had been cleaned and a few items collected from under the chairs. One of them was a small, battered notebook. Dark green cover. His assistant held it out like it was nothing. Ethan almost said throw it away. Instead he took it. He told himself he was going to return it. He opened it on the first page. Architectural sketches. Pencil, confident lines, minimal shading, the kind of drafting that came from someone who'd taught themselves and developed their own shorthand. Building elevations. Structural notations in the margins. One full-page sketch of a glass tower from a low angle, looking up. Ethan stood in the hallway outside his office and stared at that sketch for a long time. The style was specific. Not a generic technique anyone could pick up from an online tutorial. It was the particular way of mapping depth that came from a specific habit of seeing, starting from the roofline and working down, anchoring the weight at the base last. Ethan had done it exactly that way at 22, 23, back when he'd still thought he might become an architect before the business consumed everything. He'd never taught anyone that method. He'd never posted it anywhere. He'd barely even thought about it in 15 years. He closed the notebook. He drove across town. Nora answered the door of the apartment in a way that told him she'd been expecting someone, just not necessarily him. He held up the notebook. Something moved across her face. She took it from him, quickly, and held it against her chest. Coles, she said. I know. He paused. He draws buildings. He always has. Her voice was quiet. Since he could hold a pencil, he was drawing buildings. She didn't look at Ethan when she said it. She looked at the notebook in her hands. He'll want this back. Thank you for bringing it. She was closing the door. Nora. He stopped her without touching anything. Just his voice. What's his favorite part? When he draws them. Does he start from the top or the bottom? She looked up at him then. And the way she looked at him, for just a moment, just one unguarded second, told him everything and nothing at the same time. Good night, Ethan, she said. The door closed. He went back to his office. It was nearly 9. The building was mostly empty, just the overnight security and the hum of the ventilation system. He sat at his desk. He opened the bottom drawer, the one that didn't hold business documents, the one that held the things he hadn't thrown away and couldn't explain keeping. He reached to the back and took out a framed photograph. Himself at 23. Sitting on a low wall somewhere, sketchbook open across his knees, laughing at something off camera. The sketchbook page was visible. Clear enough. He held the photo next to his phone, where he'd photographed one page of Cole's notebook before returning it. The same roofline first method. The same way of anchoring the base last. The same margin notation style, tiny numbers, bracketed. Not similar. The same. Ethan set both down on the desk. He sat there for a long time. The city moved outside the glass. He didn't move at all. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. It rang twice. When Graham answered, Ethan said only 3 words. I need answers. If you felt that ending like a punch to the chest, you're exactly where this story wants you. Drop a comment and tell us what you think Ethan is starting to understand. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 4. The boardroom meeting was supposed to be about the Q3 numbers. It lasted 11 minutes before Aldrich Vane brought up Nora. Vane was the kind of man who always had a reason ready before he had a problem. Polished, patient, the sort of board member who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He waited until the financial slides were done and the room was relaxed, and then he said, almost casually, that he'd heard Ethan had received an unscheduled visitor earlier in the week. A woman with some connection to his personal history. And that the board felt it was worth addressing. Ethan looked at him. Do you? We feel it could be a distraction, Vane said. At a sensitive time for the company. We'd like to know if there's anything that needs to be managed. Managed. Ethan repeated the word without inflection. She came to my building. I met with her for 20 minutes. That's the extent of it. And the boy with her? The room was very quiet. That's a personal matter, Ethan said. We'd simply feel better if... I understand what you'd feel better about, Aldrich. Ethan closed the folder in front of him. The answer is no. Meeting's done. He walked out before Vane could respond. But in the elevator, alone, he felt it, that specific pressure behind the eyes that came when too many things needed his attention at once and all of them were important. Vane shouldn't have known about Nora. Not that quickly. Not with that level of detail. Someone had told him. Someone inside the building. Ethan filed that away. He would come back to it. By Wednesday he had a private investigator. Not the kind of investigator he'd used before, the one he'd hired years ago to find Nora. This one was younger, quieter, recommended by Graham through 2 layers of referral. Ethan gave him only one job, find out what the document actually was. Not who gave it to him. Not why. Just what it was, its origin, its purpose, whether it was real. He didn't tell the investigator about Cole. He didn't mention the birth certificate, the notebooks, or the sketches. He was trying, still, to keep the pieces separate. To handle one thing at a time. He told himself that was strategy. He was starting to suspect it was something else. Across the city, Cole was 3 days into a new school. He was used to new schools. He knew the rhythm, keep your head down the first week, figure out who the teachers actually were versus who they performed as, find the quietest table in the cafeteria and claim it early. He had a system. What he didn't have a system for was the Tuesday math class, where Mr. Alcott was building toward a problem on the board, step by step, methodical, the way teachers do when they want the class to feel the process, and Cole had the answer before the man had finished writing the question. He didn't say anything. He watched Alcott finish. He watched the class stare at it. Then he raised his hand. Alcott looked at him. You're new. Yeah. Go ahead. Cole gave the answer. Then, because it seemed like the teacher wanted more, he gave the method in 3 lines, starting from the part Alcott had written last. The room was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn that approach? Alcott asked. I taught myself, Cole said. Alcott looked at him for a long second. Not skeptically, more like he was recalibrating something. Okay, he said. Then he turned back to the board. Cole went back to his notebook. Not the green one, a different one. He started sketching something in the margin, small and precise. A roofline. A glass face. A building that didn't exist yet. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He never was. That was the thing about Cole, his gifts announced themselves before he did, and he was always slightly behind them, quietly trying to pull them back. Nora was in the middle of unpacking the kitchen when the knock came. She knew who it was before she opened the door. There was only one person who had this address, and only one reason to use it. Sylvia Crane looked the same as she always had, careful clothes, careful expression, the kind of woman who managed to be both warm and watchful at the same time. She'd worked alongside Ethan during the marriage. Back office, finance adjacent. She'd been the first person Nora had called when things started falling apart, and the last person she'd spoken to before leaving. How did you find this place? Nora asked. I have a friend at the school, Sylvia said. Enrollment records. Nora stepped back and let her in. They sat at the small kitchen table with the window behind them. Sylvia didn't waste time. He's going to find out, Nora. You know that. That depends on what he finds. Sylvia studied her. You gave him the document. I gave him part of it. That's not the same as being honest. No, Nora said. It's not. She looked at her hands. But I need to know something first. Before he knows everything. I need to know what kind of man he became. Sylvia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he's not who you were told he was. Back then. I want you to know that I've believed that for a long time. She paused. But there are people around him who don't want you here. And they have more reach than you realize. She left without saying who those people were. Nora sat at the table after the door closed and thought about that word. Reach. Someone with reach. Someone who'd had it 17 years ago and apparently still did. The investigator called Thursday morning. Ethan had expected to wait another week. The man's voice, when Ethan answered, had a careful quality to it. Like someone choosing their words before they said them. "The document is real," he said. Ethan said nothing. Waited. "Which means something you signed 17 years ago wasn't signed by you." The signature was forged. Professionally, not a quick job. Someone who had access to your documents, your signature on file, and enough time to do it cleanly. "Someone I trusted," Ethan said quietly. "Someone close." "Yes." Ethan thanked him, hung up, and went to find Marcus. He found him in his office, standing at the window. Ethan walked in without knocking and set the document on the desk between them without a word. Marcus turned around. He looked at the document. He picked it up. He read it slowly. Ethan watched his face. Marcus had a good face for hiding things, he always had, but this time something moved beneath the surface. Not guilt, exactly. Something older than guilt. When Marcus finished, he looked up. He said something. And Ethan went completely still. The audience doesn't get to hear those words. Not yet. But what they see is Ethan's face, and what's on it isn't anger. It's something quieter and much more damaging. The specific expression of a man who has just understood that a question he stopped asking years ago had an answer the whole time. Ethan walked out of the office without another word. Past Dana's desk, past the elevator, straight through the lobby and out the front doors onto the street. He stood on the pavement. The city moved around him like it always did, indifferent, fast, unconcerned. His phone rang. The investigator. Ethan answered. "Mr. Harlow." The man's voice was careful again. Careful in a new way. "Before you do anything else, you need to know something. Cole's birth certificate lists no father. But there's an amendment filed 6 months after he was born." A pause. "It was sealed. Someone paid to have it sealed." The street noise filled the silence. "Do you want to know who?" That question is sitting on all of us right now. Drop a comment and tell us who you think paid to seal that record. Subscribe and hit the bell so you'll hear the moment Chapter 5 drops. Nora chose a quiet place. A coffee shop near the waterfront, small enough that no one would recognize Ethan, far enough from his building that it didn't feel like his territory or hers. She was already there when he arrived. Coffee in front of her, untouched. Hands flat on the table. Like she'd been rehearsing something. Ethan sat down. He didn't order anything. "Talk," he said. She did. Cole was not his son. She said it simply. No build-up, no softening. Just the sentence, clean and direct, the way you say something when you've practiced it long enough that the emotion has been pressed out of it. Cole's father was a man named Declan Marsh. A journalist. Nora had met him about a year after she left, after everything fell apart, after she'd put as much distance between herself and this city as she could manage. They were together briefly. It didn't last. But Cole came from it. Declan had been part of Cole's life in the limited way he was capable of being, present when it was easy, absent when it wasn't. 4 years ago, he died. A cardiac event, sudden, no warning. And then everything he left behind became a legal problem. His family had contested the estate. They didn't want to acknowledge Cole. They'd gone as far as filing challenges against his birth record, hence the sealed amendment, hence the mess. That was why she'd come back. Not to revisit the past. Not to cause problems. She needed a legal team with enough weight behind it to push back against Declan's family. She'd needed someone the family couldn't out-resource. She'd needed Ethan. The document she'd given him was related to Declan's estate, proof of something that affected Cole's claim. It had Ethan's name on it only because of a shared financial connection from years ago, a detail she'd had to trace to understand the full picture. It wasn't about Ethan. It had never been about Ethan. She finished. She picked up her coffee. She waited. Ethan sat with it. And the strange thing, the thing he didn't fully expect, was how quickly everything rearranged itself. The sketches, coincidence, kids absorbed things from the world around them. The walk, he'd been projecting, grief doing what grief does, finding patterns in random movement. The sealed record, Declan's family, covering tracks, exactly as Nora had just described. Every strange thing that had been pulling at him for 2 weeks had a clean explanation now. And clean explanations, when you've been carrying uncertainty, feel like putting down something very heavy. He realized he'd been holding his shoulders up. He let them drop. "I owe you an apology," he said. Nora looked at him. "For what?" "For assuming. For the way I looked at you in that waiting room." He paused. "For a lot of things." She accepted it in the way she accepted most things, quietly, without fully letting it in. "You didn't know. I should have asked instead of," he stopped. "I should have asked." She nodded once. That was all. By the end of that week, Ethan had connected Nora with his legal team. Graham handled it with his usual precision: initial review of the estate challenge, assessment of the birth record dispute, a letter to Declan's family's attorneys that was, in Graham's words, firm but not yet aggressive. And something shifted. Without the weight of suspicion between them, Ethan and Nora found they could exist in the same room without the air going tight. Not warmly, they weren't there yet, and maybe they never would be. But civilly. Honestly. Like two people who had once known each other very well and were now carefully learning what remained. She came to the office twice that week. Both times, Cole came with her. The second time, Ethan found himself alone with the boy for almost 10 minutes while Nora was with Graham's team. Cole was sitting in the chair by the window, looking out at the city. Not on his phone. Just looking. Do you like cities? Ethan asked. Cole considered this seriously. I like the way they're built. What do you mean? Like, every building had to solve a problem. He glanced at Ethan briefly. What the ground is like. What the wind does. How much glass before it becomes a liability. He looked back at the window. Most people just see the outside. But there's always a decision behind it. Ethan looked at him. He thought, this is a 16-year-old boy whose father just died. He's probably just interested in buildings. He thought, I used to talk exactly like that at his age. He chose the first thought? He held it firmly. He told himself the second one was the kind of pattern matching the brain does when it wants to find meaning in randomness. You're right, Ethan said. There's always a decision behind it. Cole nodded. Like that was enough. He went back to looking at the city. That evening, Ethan was at home for the first time in weeks feeling something close to settled. Then his doorbell rang. Diane Harlow had her own key, but she never used it unannounced. Tonight she rang the bell, which meant she'd thought about this visit. Which meant it wasn't casual. She came in. She sat down in the chair across from him without taking off her coat. That detail registered somewhere in the back of his mind. She didn't take off her coat. She told you about Declan, Diane said. Not a question. Ethan set down his glass. How do you know about that? Did she tell you about Declan? Diane repeated. Yes. Cole is his son. She needs help with an estate dispute. I'm handling it. He paused. How do you know any of this? Diane looked at him. Her face was doing something careful and sad at the same time. And you believed her, she said. Diane, I'm not asking to be difficult. She reached into her handbag. I need you to look at something. She placed a photograph on the coffee table between them. Old. The kind of photo that had been handled many times, edges soft, colors slightly faded the way photographs from that era faded. She placed it face up and then she stood, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. Mom. He said it like a question. She paused at the door. She didn't turn around. I've had that for a long time, she said. I've been waiting to know if I'd ever need to show it to you. She left. Ethan sat in the quiet of his living room and looked at the photograph. Nora. Younger, visibly pregnant, months along, unmistakably so. She was standing in front of a window somewhere, not looking at the camera, like she hadn't known she was being photographed. He turned it over. On the back, handwritten, was a date. He read it. Then he reached for his phone and opened the timeline he'd quietly built over the past 2 weeks, Nora's account of events, Declan's name, when she said she'd met him, when Cole was born. He looked at the date on the photograph again. 4 months. The photograph was dated 4 months before Nora said she had ever met Declan Marsh. Ethan set the photograph down very carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to break before you fully understood what it is. The city outside his window was bright and indifferent and entirely unaware that everything he'd believed for the last 7 days had just come apart in his hands. Whatever you thought you understood after last chapter, this is the moment it changes. Drop a comment telling us what you think Diane knew and how long she's been holding it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because chapter 6 is where this story stops holding back. Ethan didn't call ahead this time. He drove to the East Side apartment, took the stairs, and knocked on the door before he'd fully decided what he was going to say. He had the photograph in his coat pocket. That was enough of a plan. Nora opened the door. She read his face in about half a second. Cole's not here, she said. He's at school. Good, Ethan said. Then we can talk. He took the photograph out and held it toward her. She went very still. Not the kind of still that comes from shock. The kind that comes from recognition, from seeing something arrive that you always knew was coming and hoped somehow wouldn't. Her eyes moved from the photograph to Ethan's face and then back down. She didn't deny it. Not immediately. That silence lasted 3 full seconds, and in those 3 seconds it said everything the Declan story had been designed to prevent. Where did you get that? She asked. Does it matter? She stepped back from the door. He came in. She sat at the kitchen table. He stayed standing. The photograph sat between them like a third person in the room. The date on the back, he said. Walk me through it. Nora looked at the table. Then she looked up at him, and when she did, something in her face changed, not cracked, exactly. More like a door that had been held shut for a very long time finally moving on its hinges. Declan was real, she said. I need you to understand that. He existed. He was in Cole's life. What I told you about the estate, that's all real. But the timeline. The timeline was, I adjusted it. You lied. I constructed something that would let me get close enough to the truth without. She stopped. I needed to know something first. Before Cole knew anything. Before you knew anything. What did you need to know? She looked at him directly. Whether you were safe. The word landed strangely. Ethan turned it over. Safe, he repeated. I don't understand what that means. Safe for him to know, she said. Safe to be known by. The room was quiet for a moment. And then Ethan understood what she wasn't saying, that somewhere in her calculation, there had been a version of this where Ethan was a threat. Not physically. Something more complicated. The kind of danger that comes from a man who has the power to reshape a young person's understanding of who they are and where they come from. She'd come back to take his measure before she handed Cole the information that could change everything. That landed somewhere painful. Not because she was wrong to be careful. Because he understood, for the first time, what she'd been carrying alone all these years, not just a secret, but the full weight of deciding when and how and whether a truth was safe to give. Graham decoded the document, he said, shifting. The one you gave me. She nodded, like she'd been expecting this too. Someone forged my signature 17 years ago. Diverted funds. Built something they could use to frame me, and then just held it. Never used it. Leverage, Nora said quietly. Yes. He paused. You knew about this. I found pieces of it. Back then, before I left. I didn't understand what I was looking at, I thought it was you. I thought you'd done something. She met his eyes. That's why I left the way I did. No confrontation. I was scared of what the confrontation would mean. Ethan sat down across from her now. Someone wanted you to think that. Yes, she said. I know that now. I didn't know it then. Neither of them spoke for a moment. 17 years of distance, and it came down to this, one person's fear and one person's hidden leverage and no one who thought to simply talk. Then Ethan asked the question. The one he'd been building toward for 3 weeks, the one he'd circled and delayed and talked himself out of every time it got too close. Nora. He kept his voice steady. Is Cole my son? She looked at him. And what she said next, he wasn't ready for it. That question, she said slowly, has a more complicated answer than yes or no. The room went completely silent. Not a denial. Not a confirmation. Something in between that was somehow harder than either one. Neither of them heard the soft sound from the hallway. Cole had come back early. A half day at school, he'd mentioned it that morning, but Nora had forgotten. He'd let himself in quietly, the way he always did, not wanting to interrupt. He heard enough. Not everything. Enough. He stood in the hallway for about 10 seconds. Then he turned and walked back out the front door without making a sound, and neither of them knew he'd been there at all. Nora noticed at 6 in the evening. Dinner ready, his door open, his room empty. She called his phone. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. By 7 she called Ethan. Her voice was controlled but only barely. Cole's not here. He's not answering his phone. Ethan was out the door before she finished the sentence. They searched separately, the school, the neighborhood, the waterfront where Cole had once mentioned he liked to walk. Nothing. No one had seen him. 2 hours of driving through a city that was indifferent and dark and very large. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from his overnight security team. There's a minor on the front steps. Has been here about 40 minutes. Didn't ask to come in. Just sitting. Ethan got there first. Cole was sitting on the stone steps of Harlow Industries with his knees up and his jacket pulled close, not looking at his phone, not doing anything. Just sitting. The building rose behind him, glass and steel and light, and he looked small against it in a way that made something in Ethan's chest tighten sharply. He sat down beside him. He didn't say anything right away. Cole didn't look at him. Nora arrived 2 minutes later, slightly out of breath, stopping at the bottom of the steps when she saw them both. Cole looked up at her. Then at Ethan. Back at her. And then, in the voice of a boy who is trying very hard to sound like he's fine with something that is not fine, he said. I already know. He paused. I've known for 3 months. I just wanted to see if either of you would tell me the truth. The city noise continued around them. A cab passed. Somewhere down the block a door opened and closed. Neither Ethan nor Nora said a word. Because there was nothing to say to a 16-year-old boy who had been sitting with the truth longer than either of the adults in his life had been willing to speak it. Cole just said out loud what this whole story has been building toward. Drop a comment and tell us how long you think he's known, and what you think happens next. Subscribe and turn on notifications because Chapter 7 is where everything changes. They sat on the steps of Harlow Industries for almost an hour. Cole in the middle. Nora on his left. Ethan on his right. The city moving around them like it had somewhere to be. None of them spoke for the first several minutes, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and Cole was the one who would decide when to begin. He did, eventually. In his own time. I found it while we were packing, he said. Back home. A few months ago. You asked me to go through the storage boxes in the closet. He was looking at Nora. There was a file folder at the bottom. I wasn't trying to find anything. It was there. Nora's eyes closed for a moment. Just a moment. My original birth certificate, Cole continued. And a copy of the sealed amendment. The name in the amendment had been blacked out with a marker. He paused. But the ink had bled through to the back of the page. The street noise filled the space where words should have been. I could read it, Cole said. He looked at Ethan then. Not accusingly. Not with pain, exactly. With the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a weight that wasn't theirs to carry and is now, carefully, deliberately, setting it down. I'm not going to say it, he said. I've known for 3 months. I've read everything there is to read about this. He glanced briefly at the building behind him. I sat here tonight because I needed to figure out if either of you were ever going to tell me the truth or if I was just going to have to live with knowing something you both pretended wasn't real. Neither Ethan nor Nora spoke. So I want to hear it, Cole said. From one of you. Out loud. He looked between them. That's all. A 16-year-old boy. Stone steps. 2 in the morning. And he was the calmest person there. Nora looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Cole. And for the first time in this entire story, neither adult knew what to do next. Cole had walked into the room, metaphorically, and taken the chair at the head of the table. And he'd done it without raising his voice. They didn't resolve it that night. They couldn't. What Cole had asked for deserved more than a parking lot conversation under street lamps. Nora took him home. Ethan drove back toward his building with the windows down and the city coming at him from all sides, his hand steady on the wheel and his mind entirely somewhere else. He was still trying to work out how a 16-year-old had read a blacked-out name through the back of a page and then carried that information alone for 3 months without breaking, when his phone buzzed. Aldrich Vane. Requesting a meeting. Tomorrow morning. His office. Ethan stared at the message at a red light. He typed back, my office. 8 a.m. Vane arrived at 8 exactly. He didn't bring anyone. That was its own kind of message. This wasn't official board business. This was personal. He sat across from Ethan without waiting to be invited and folded his hands on the table like a man who had rehearsed this. I know about the boy, he said. Ethan said nothing. I know about the document. The forged signature. Vane's voice was measured. Calm. The voice of someone who believes they hold all the cards. And I want you to understand something clearly, Ethan. If you acknowledge that boy publicly, if you make any formal statement about paternity, if his name appears in connection with this company in any way, the board will use that document to remove you. We have the votes. You have the votes today, Ethan said. That changes. Does it? Vane tilted his head slightly. Consider your position carefully. Everything you've built. Everything you've protected. He paused. All of it becomes a conversation about what you may or may not have signed 17 years ago. And those conversations have a way of lasting. Ethan looked at him. Why does Cole's existence threaten you? Something moved behind Vane's eyes. Just briefly. It doesn't threaten me. It complicates. Who created the forgery, Aldrich? The room went very quiet. Vane stood up. 8 a.m. was early enough for both of us, he said, and left. Ethan sat alone in his office after Vane walked out and let himself think, really think, about what he now knew. The forgery had been created 17 years ago. Held and used. Now Vane was activating it in direct response to Cole's existence becoming known. Which meant whoever created that forgery had known about Cole before Cole was born. Had known about Nora's pregnancy. Had known what was happening between Ethan and Nora in the final months of their marriage. The only people inside that circle had been Ethan, Nora, and one other person. He called Nora. She answered on the second ring. Vane knows about Cole, he said. Someone told him. And whoever told him, they're the same person who built the forgery. Which means they knew about you before you left. He paused. Nora. Why did you leave? Not the documents. The real reason. A long silence. Then she told him. The thing she'd never said out loud to anyone. Someone had come to her. With evidence. Documents, photographs, a paper trail. Proof, she'd believed it was proof, that Ethan had made arrangements. That once the company recovered, once he didn't need the stability of a marriage anymore, she would be removed from his life. Quietly. Efficiently. The way certain problems get handled by powerful men with capable people around them. She'd been terrified. She was already quietly, privately pregnant. She hadn't told Ethan yet. And she ran. Before he could do it first. Ethan listened to all of it without speaking. "Who brought you that evidence?" he asked. "He said he was trying to help me," Nora said. "He said he cared about what happened to me." He said. "His name, Nora." She said it. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. His expression didn't change. Not a muscle. But his eyes moved slowly across the office, across the desk, the window, the door, and came to rest on the empty chair where Marcus sat during their private meetings. The chair that Marcus had occupied for 11 years. The friend who had always been exactly where Ethan needed him to be. He thanked Nora quietly. He hung up. Marcus was already in his office when Ethan got there. Sitting in that chair. Waiting. Like he'd known the conversation was coming, because he'd always known it was coming, eventually. He'd just been calculating how long he had. He looked at Ethan when the door opened. And before Ethan could say a single word, Marcus said, "Whatever she told you, I need you to hear my side before you decide anything." Ethan stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Marcus is finally in the room and there's nowhere left to hide. Drop a comment and tell us if you think there's any version of his explanation that could make sense of what he did. Subscribe and turn on notifications because Chapter 8 is the one this whole story has been building toward." Marcus didn't look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had been waiting. Sitting in that chair with his jacket still on, hands folded, eyes steady. Like he'd rehearsed this moment so many times that the actual arrival of it felt almost like relief. Ethan closed the office door. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at the person he'd trusted more than anyone for over a decade, and he waited. "I loved her," Marcus said. "Before you did. Before you even met her." The room was completely still. "I introduced you," Marcus continued. "You don't remember, it was a work event, crowded, quick. But I knew her first. And when she chose you," he stopped. "I buried it. I told myself it was fine. That's what you do. You bury it and you move on and you be a good friend." He looked at his hands. "I was a good friend. For years. I really was." Ethan said nothing. "When the company started failing, when you were in the worst of it, barely sleeping, losing contracts, and you were still going home to dinner and Sunday mornings and all of it," Marcus paused. "I told myself the marriage was the problem. That you couldn't make the hard decisions you needed to make because you were trying to protect her from the reality of what was happening. I convinced myself that if she wasn't there, you'd become what you needed to be." He said it like it made sense. Like it had always made sense. And the most disturbing part was that somewhere beneath the wreckage of it, Ethan could see the structure, the logic Marcus had built, brick by brick, to make himself the hero of his own story. "So you made her leave," Ethan said. "I created evidence. Documents, a few photographs, a paper trail. Something that would make her afraid. Something she'd believe." Marcus met his eyes. "I knew what she feared most. I'd watched your marriage long enough to know. That I'd discard her." "Yes." The word landed like something dropped from a height. "She was already careful about you," Marcus said. "Already watching for signs that the power would change how you treated her. I didn't have to invent much. I just had to make what she already feared look real." He paused. "She left within 2 weeks." Ethan turned toward the window. He needed somewhere else to look for a moment. "Did you know she was pregnant?" "No." The answer came quickly. Firmly. "I didn't know. I found out years later. I heard something through a contact. By then Cole was already, I don't know, 5, 6 years old." Marcus's voice dropped. "I told myself it was too late. That telling you would only cause damage. That you'd built something without her and Cole was fine and." "Stop." Ethan said it quietly. Not angry. Quiet in the way that is much more final than anger. "Stop explaining the silence. I understand the silence." Marcus went still. "The forged document," Ethan said. "The one Nora brought. That was Vane. Not you. Vane built that independently. He saw the chaos of Nora leaving and used it, created something he could hold over you later if he ever needed to. Two separate things happened in the same window." Marcus looked up. "I didn't know about the forgery until recently. I want you to believe that." Ethan turned around. He looked at Marcus for a long moment. "Does Cole know any of what you just told me?" "No." "Then this conversation never happened," Ethan said. "Not until I decide what to do with it." He picked up his jacket and walked out. He drove to Nora's apartment. It was late, past 10. She answered the door in the quiet way of someone who hadn't been sleeping anyway. He came in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same 2 chairs. He told her everything Marcus had said. All of it. Without softening a single part. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't cry. She sat very still, hands flat on the table, eyes focused on something in the middle distance. The stillness lasted a long time. Then she said, I lost 17 years because a man thought he knew better than I did what my life should look like. It wasn't said with heat. It was said the way you say something that you've finally found the exact right words for, after years of carrying it without a name. Ethan looked at her. So did I, he said. And that was all. 2 sentences. 4 words. But they held everything, all of it, the marriage and the leaving and the 2 years he'd searched and the 15 years after that when he'd stopped, and every version of a life that had happened differently than it should have because one person decided he knew better. They sat with it together. Not moving toward each other. Not reaching for comfort. Just 2 people finally standing in the same version of the truth at the same time, for the first time. Grieving something they hadn't been allowed to grieve before because they hadn't known, until now, exactly what they'd lost. There was something almost unbearable about it. Not because it was violent or loud. Because it was so quiet. Because 17 years of damage could fit into a kitchen table conversation at 10 o'clock at night, and still feel too large to hold. Neither of them heard Cole's door open. He stood in the hallway for a moment, long enough to feel the weight of the room without needing to hear every word. Long enough to understand the shape of what was happening, even if not every detail. Then he stepped into the doorway. Both of them looked up. Cole's face was unreadable in the specific way that teenagers go unreadable when they're feeling too much to let any single thing show. He looked at his mother first. Then at Ethan. I need to know something, he said. His voice was steady. 16 years old and completely steady. Not who my father is. He paused. I already know that. Neither adult moved. Cole looked directly at Ethan. And the question he asked, the one he'd clearly been holding for much longer than tonight, maybe longer than 3 months, maybe since the first time he'd ever understood that the space where a father should have been was empty, was this. Did he ever look for me? The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Louder than the city outside. Louder than 17 years. Louder than anything either Ethan or Nora could have said. Because the true answer, the complete, honest, devastating answer, was that Ethan had looked for Nora. He had looked for 2 full years. And he had never known Cole existed. He had never been looking for Cole. Because he hadn't known Cole was there to find. That question is going to stay with you. Drop a comment and tell us what you think Ethan should say. Subscribe and turn on notifications because Chapter 9 is where this story changes everything you thought you understood. Cole was still standing in the doorway. The question was still in the room. Did he ever look for me? Ethan looked at this boy, 16 years old, steady voice, waiting with a patience that had probably cost him more than anyone knew, and he made a decision. Not to manage the answer. Not to find the version of it that would hurt least. Just to tell the truth, exactly as it was. I looked for your mother, he said. For almost 2 years after she left. I hired someone. I got close twice. He paused. I didn't know you existed. I didn't know to look for you. Cole absorbed this without flinching. He nodded slowly, just once, the way he nodded when he was filing something away, not dismissing it, storing it. Processing it in the careful, private way he processed everything. And the room understood something in that moment. Cole's question had never really been about biology. It hadn't been am I his son or does he know who I am? It had been something older and more fundamental than any of that. It had been, did I matter before anyone knew I was here? And the honest answer, the only honest answer, was that Ethan had been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. Not because he didn't care. Because he hadn't been told there was something to find. That distinction was everything. And Cole understood it. His face said so. Then he said something that changed the shape of the entire story. She came back because of my heart. Nora went very still. Ethan looked at Cole. What? 8 months ago I was diagnosed with a cardiac condition. Cole said it the way he said most hard things, directly, without performance. It's genetic. The doctors needed a full biological family history to know how to treat it. They needed his records. He glanced at Ethan briefly. She didn't know how to ask. So she built a reason to come back that wasn't the real reason. The silence in the room was a different kind of silence now. Ethan turned to Nora slowly. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain it immediately either. She sat with it for a moment, the truth of it, finally fully in the open, and something in her posture changed. Not collapsed. Just released. Like a breath she'd been holding for 8 months. The document, Ethan said quietly. The legal matter. Declan's estate. Real, she said. All of it was real. But it wasn't why I came. He thought about the last several weeks. Every conversation, every careful half-truth, Every moment where she'd said I need you to trust me without explaining why trust was the right thing to give. He thought about how certain he'd been, at various points, that he understood what was happening. He had been asking the wrong question the entire time. They all had. Cole looked at Ethan. His voice stayed even. She does this, he said. She protects me instead of asking for help. She's been doing it my whole life. He wasn't angry. He sounded like someone describing the weather, something real and consistent that he'd simply learned to navigate. She would have gotten what she needed and left without any of this happening. Without you knowing anything. He paused. I didn't want that. Ethan looked at him. What did you want? Cole didn't answer immediately. He looked at the floor, then back up. I wanted to know what kind of person you were before I decided anything about you. A pause. That's why I sat on your steps. That's why I waited. Nora made a small sound. Not quite a word. Ethan turned back to her. Why didn't you just ask me? She looked at her hands. I didn't know how to come back and say I needed you. Her voice was quiet. Not after everything. Not after 17 years of, I didn't know if you'd help. I didn't know if you'd be angry. I didn't know if bringing Cole into your world would. She stopped. I was scared. So I built something I could control instead of asking for something I couldn't. You could have just asked, Ethan said. I know, she said. I know that. The knock at the door came at exactly the wrong moment and exactly the right one. Diane Harlow didn't wait to be invited in. She had a key. Nora had given it to her 2 days ago, and Ethan hadn't known that either. There was apparently quite a lot he hadn't known. She came in and read the room in about 3 seconds. She looked at Cole first, a long, careful look, the kind that held both apology and affection, and then she looked at Ethan. She reached into her bag and took out an envelope. I had these prepared 6 months ago, she said. She held it out to Ethan. Your full medical records. Cardiology, family history, genetic panels. Everything the doctors would need. She paused. I knew she'd come back when Cole needed them. I just didn't know if she'd come back honestly or quietly. I was waiting to see. Ethan stared at his mother. You knew about Cole. Sylvia Crane has been a friend of mine for a long time, Diane said simply. She kept me informed. Not intrusively, just enough to know he was safe. To know he existed. She looked at Cole again. I have wanted to meet you for a very long time. Cole looked at this woman, this grandmother he hadn't known he had, and for the first time all evening, something in his face softened just slightly. Hi, he said. Hi, Diane said back. Ethan took the envelope from his mother. He held it for a moment, the weight of it, 6 months of preparation, his own medical history gathered and waiting for a boy he hadn't known to find. Then Cole reached out and took it from his hands. He held it carefully. He looked at it the way he looked at buildings, like he was reading the decisions behind the surface. Then he looked up at Ethan. Can I ask you something else? Yes, Ethan said. Cole glanced at his mother. Then back. When you find out someone lied to you to protect you, he paused. Do you forgive them for it? The question landed in the room like something gently, deliberately placed. It was aimed at Nora. Everyone understood that. Cole understood it himself. But he had aimed it at Ethan because Ethan was the one who could answer it honestly, the one who had just spent 17 years on the receiving end of exactly that kind of protection. Ethan looked at Nora. She was watching him. Not asking for anything. Just watching. He looked back at Cole. And he answered. Not with a speech. Not with conditions or caveats or the careful language of a man who was still deciding how he felt. He answered simply, directly, the way you answer a question when the truth is finally easier than anything else. In his answer, in those few quiet words, the audience understood for the first time what this story had always been about. Not the secret. Not the document. Not the forgery or the betrayal or the 17 years of silence. It had always been about whether the people we love are allowed to need us. And whether we're brave enough to let them. We're one chapter away from the end, and this story has never felt more real. Drop a comment and tell us what you think Ethan said. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here for the final chapter, because some endings stay with you long after the story is over. Marcus's resignation letter was 1 page. Handwritten, which surprised Ethan. Everything Marcus did was typed, organized, efficient. The handwriting felt like an admission that this moment was too personal for the usual distance. Ethan read it once. Then he set it on his desk. Marcus was standing across from him, hands at his sides, waiting for whatever came next. Prepared for anger. Maybe hoping for it, the way people sometimes hope to be punished because punishment is cleaner than being simply let go. Ethan picked up a pen and signed the acknowledgement line at the bottom. I hope you find something to believe in, he said, that doesn't require destroying someone else's. He slid the letter back across the desk. Marcus picked it up. He looked like he wanted to say something, one more explanation, one more attempt to make the shape of what he'd done more bearable. But he didn't. He folded the letter. He left. Ethan stood at his window for a long moment after the door closed. 11 years. He kept returning to that number, not with grief, exactly. With the particular exhaustion that comes from realizing how much energy you spent trusting someone who was managing you the whole time. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel relieved. He felt the absence where something had been, and he let it be an absence, and he moved on. Aldrich Vane's removal from the board took 4 days. Graham handled it with the forged document, now fully authenticated, the trail leading back to Vane with the kind of clarity that only appears when someone has been careful for too long and finally makes one mistake they can't erase. The board voted. Vane left without a statement, which was its own kind of statement. Ethan sat in the boardroom after the vote and watched the empty chair where Vane had always positioned himself, slightly off-center, angled toward the door, like he'd always been planning his exit. The company was secure. The threat was gone. 2 separate betrayals, finally both accounted for. He felt nothing like triumph. He felt the way you feel when something painful is over, not happy, just lighter. Like a window open in a room that had been shut for too long. He had a call to make. Cole received the medical news on a Tuesday morning. The genetic information from Ethan's records had given the cardiologists exactly what they needed, a known hereditary pattern, well documented, manageable with the right medication and regular monitoring. Not a shadow over his life. A condition with a clear path forward. The doctor used the word treatable 3 times in the appointment. Cole nodded each time. He asked 2 precise, specific questions about long-term management. The doctor answered them. Cole thanked her. On the way out of the clinic, he was quiet. Nora walked beside him, close but not touching, reading him the way she'd learned to read him over 16 years. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. She believed him, because it was true. Cole processed things quietly and completely, and by the time he said he was okay, he usually was. That had always been both his strength and the thing that occasionally broke her heart, how self-contained he'd learned to be. He asked if they could go by Harlow Industries. She said yes. Ethan was already there when they arrived. He'd known they were coming. Cole had texted him, which still felt new and slightly extraordinary, receiving texts from this boy. 3 words, good news. Coming by. Cole sat on the front steps. The same steps. The city afternoon spread out around them, warmer than the night he'd sat here at 2 in the morning, the night everything changed. Ethan sat beside him. They didn't talk about the diagnosis immediately. They didn't talk about Marcus, or Vane, or the document, or 17 years of anything. Cole looked up at the building, the glass face of it, the lines of it against the sky, and asked, "When was it built?" Ethan looked up too. 22 years ago. When I was 31. Almost broke the company finishing it. What's it supposed to represent? Ethan thought about that. Stability, he said. That was the idea. Something that looked like it would still be standing in 100 years. He paused. I was terrified the whole time I was building it. I just didn't want anyone to know that. Cole nodded slowly. He was memorizing something, Ethan could feel it. The way Cole listened when he wanted to keep what he was hearing. Storing it somewhere careful. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just let the boy look at the building for as long as he wanted. Above them, in a window on the 4th floor, Nora watched. She'd found her way up without anyone asking, which felt right. This building had been part of the story long enough that it almost owed her the view. She stood at the glass and looked down at the 2 of them on the steps. Father and son, sitting close but not touching, looking up at the same thing. Diane appeared beside her. Quietly, the way Diane did everything. They stood together for a moment without speaking. Then Diane said, "You could have just asked him." Nora kept looking at the window. "I know. All of this," Diane said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. The document. The story about Declan. The legal cover. All of it could have been one phone call. "I know," Nora said again. "I've never been good at that. Asking." Diane looked at her. Neither was he. A pause. "You might be more suited to each other than either of you realized." It wasn't a push. It wasn't a suggestion disguised as an observation. It was just a true thing, said plainly, by a woman who had watched both of them from a distance for 17 years and knew the shape of what she was looking at. Nora didn't respond. But she didn't look away from the window either. The restaurant was small, near the water, the kind of place with paper menus and wooden tables and no reason to impress anyone. Ethan had suggested it. Cole had approved it in the brief, decisive way he approved things he actually liked. They arrived in the early evening. The water outside was going golden. A table near the window, 3 chairs, enough space, no agenda. Cole picked up the menu and set it down without opening it. When the server came, he ordered first. Confidently. Like he'd known what he wanted before he walked in, which he probably had. That was Cole. He decided things in advance and then arrived at them calmly, without second-guessing. Ethan watched him do it and felt something he hadn't felt in 17 years. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter and more complicated, the specific, unnameable weight of time that cannot be returned. All the Tuesday evenings and first days of school and small ordinary moments that had happened somewhere else, with someone else filling whatever space a father was supposed to fill, or filling themselves with Cole filling the space alone. He felt all of that. And then, underneath it, something else. The understanding, slow, careful, real, that some of the time still remained. That Cole was 16, not 30. That the building they just sat in front of was only 22 years old and had already outlasted the fear that built it. That some things arrive late and still count. Nora looked at him across the table. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Cole looked between them, just briefly, just for a second, and then he picked up his water glass and took a drink and looked back out at the water, like someone who had been waiting a long time for something ordinary and was now quietly, privately glad that it had finally arrived. Ethan didn't say everything he wanted to say. Neither did Nora. But Cole, who had spent 16 years moving through the world without knowing what he was moving toward, reached into his jacket pocket and took out a pen, a spare one he always carried, old habit, and began drawing on the corner of the paper menu. A building. Quick lines, confident. Roofline first. Ethan watched him draw. He didn't say anything about the style. He didn't point it out. He just watched his son's hand move across the paper, building something that didn't exist yet, in a city that was theirs now in a way it hadn't been a month ago. And he let himself believe, for the first time in a long time, that this was enough. That this, right here, was where the story was supposed to arrive. This story took 10 chapters to get here, and every single one was worth it. If this ending moved you, drop a comment and let us know which moment hit you hardest. Thank you for watching, and if you love stories that stay with you, subscribe and turn on notifications, there's always another one waiting.